Story 1. I think my family is a part of a satanic cult. It was one of those countless nights when sleep eluded me entirely. My phone's light illuminated my face as my thumb swiped through endless feeds, my eyes desperately seeking something interesting to focus on. Just another typical episode of my insomnia, or so I thought, until a sound changed the course of my entire existence. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Brianna, an ordinary high school teenager. My life has been a routine mix of school, friends, crushes, and the usual teenage drama. Since childhood, my life has been pretty typical. I grew up with loving parents, my mom, a devoted Christian, and my dad, who shares her faith but is less religious. I also have a little brother. My life was as mundane as it gets, filled with the usual family routines and high school drama, until that night. That night marked the beginning of a terrifying nightmare that would change everything. It was around 3 a.m., and for the past 4 days, sleep had been elusive until at least 5 a.m. I knew I had a couple more hours to go before the familiar heaviness would settle over my eyelids. Frustrated, I decided to put my phone away and try to get some rest. As soon as I closed my eyes, I heard footsteps outside my door, jolting me awake. My heart raced as I reassured myself it was just my mom getting up to use the restroom, like she did every night. But the footsteps didn't stop. I then heard another set, heavier and more deliberate. I assumed it was my dad, but a nagging thought crept into my mind: what could they possibly be doing up at 3 a.m.? Trying to shake off the unease, I closed my eyes again. But then I heard the front door creak open. A surge of adrenaline shot through me. The realization hit me like a cold wave: there could be intruders in the house. The footsteps I had assumed were my parents might belong to strangers. Panic set in, and I was frozen with dread. Little did I know, the truth awaiting me was far more terrifying than anything I could have imagined. 30 minutes had passed, and the only sounds were the faint rummaging of items, fueling my suspicion of intruders. Yet, something didn't add up. I heard my mom's voice, which contrasted sharply with my doubts. All sorts of thoughts raced through my mind, but nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to witness. An hour had passed, and I finally mustered all the courage I had. Frozen in terror for the past hour, I decided it was enough. I needed answers to the questions swirling in my head. I cautiously made my way toward the door, and with trembling hands and a heart pounding louder than ever, I cautiously made my way toward the door. The door handle was cold as ice, sending a shiver down my spine as I gripped it firmly. Slowly, I pressed it downwards, desperate to make as little noise as possible. As the door creaked open, the noises became unmistakably clear. The sound of chanting filled the air, growing louder and more ominous with each repetition. It was a language I couldn't comprehend, and it only heightened my dread. My heart raced, and I felt the blood drain from my face. I took one step forward, then another, and another, until I stood behind the translucent curtain that separated me from the scene that would haunt me forever. Beyond it, the darkness was pierced by the flickering light of countless candles illuminating my home. With trembling hands, I moved the curtains, and what I witnessed was even more sinister than it sounded. I saw around 4 people wearing black robes which covered half of their faces, only revealing a slight portion of their face that allowed me to recognize my mom and dad. They all were holding a candle and standing around what looked like a demonic symbol, which looked like something a cult would have, and it had been made with something red. Upon closer look, it looked like rice, red rice. Regardless of my will to go back to room and pretending I never saw that, my legs went numb and I was unable to move, as if some entity was holding me tightly in place, wanting my parents or whoever those people are to see me. I did everything it took in my body to move and beat the paralysis I was experiencing, and I finally braked free, dashing to my room as fast as I could have possibly imagined, while chanting got deadly loud, up to the point that when I closed my door I could still hear it loud clear. I feared about my brother, and suddenly the voices stopped. It was over, but the terror of that moment lingered into my memory forever. Needless to say, I did not get an ounce of sleep that night. The sun rised, but I was still wide awake, still processing the horrors of last night. Questions swirled relentlessly in my mind, each more unsettling than the last. Were those really my parents amidst that gathering? How could they be involved in something so chilling? And how long had this been going on for? My family shared everything with me, but the word cult wasn't ever mentioned in our house, let alone joining one. Our home had been filled with crosses and pictures of Jesus, symbols of faith and protection, or so I had believed. But the scene from last night painted a different reality, one that defied everything I thought I knew about my family's beliefs. As time passed by, my parents and father woke up at their usual times and blended into their routines. Soon it was my time to wake up Oswell, and I gathered all my courage and went out, facing my prince after what I had encountered last night. Mom lit up as she saw me and greeted me with a hug. While I still looked a bit uncomfortable, she asked me if I was all right, and I, with a bit of unease, nodded my head. My dad soon left for office, and my brother and mom went to their separate rooms, while breakfast was ready for me at the dining table, but I didn't feel like eating. Being alone in my own house felt terrifying now, but I seated myself, attempting to eat. All of a sudden, my thoughts were interrupted by a loud buzz coming from my mom's phone, which she had apparently kept on the dining table. I was never a nosy person, but after the events of last night, I was bound to find out anything more about the strange ritual yesterday. I picked up her phone and started going through it, and what I found was beyond my wildest nightmares, beyond my imaginations. I swiftly grabbed my phone and a few clothes, then bolted out of the house. My only refuge was my best friend Ashley's place, the only person I trusted. When she saw the panic on my face, she let me in without a word. I spilled everything, the messages I found revealing my mom's plan to sacrifice me in the name of Satan tonight, the drugged breakfast meant to keep me asleep all day. I was terrified and couldn't think straight. Ashley calmed me down and went to get some water. Alone in the bathroom, I tried to steady myself. But then I overheard Ashley on the phone, saying, "She's here at my house." My heart sank. Was Ashley in on it too? Was my mom behind everything? Now, I'm huddled in this bathroom, typing quietly. Ashley keeps knocking, asking if I'm okay. I'm planning my escape through the window, wondering if the only people I trusted were the ones planning to end my life. Story 2. Don't flush the toilet. Seriously, please read this if you live in an apartment complex. I know this will seem humorous to many of you, and others will simply dismiss this as fantasy. But let me assure you, I've seen what happens with my own eyes. And if I could scratch out the memory of what happened that day, I swear I'd claw out my brain with my bare hands. You all know that I can't disclose the address of the apartment that I work for. It's not just posting rules that I'd be breaking. It's also the contract I signed with the landlord. There are 2 very unusual clauses in it. The first is that I never use the bathroom in the basement. The second is that I never flush that toilet. Even if I don't use it. Don't flush it for the sake of curiosity. Don't clean it. Don't make it dirty. Don't let anyone near it. And don't let anyone flush it. I literally laughed out loud. Then I looked at the financial penalties if I broke those 2 rules and took it more seriously. I wanted the job. The salary is more than I expected, and I enjoy working as a handyman. I was offered the job and wasn't even going to mention those 2 odd clauses when the landlord brought the topic up. You read the part about the toilet in the basement? Yes, I did, and I'm satisfied with the private bathroom that comes with my office, thank you. I see no need to use the one downstairs. The landlord leaned across his desk and stared at me with his dark, black eyes. Flushing that toilet is a death sentence. Do you hear me? If you are going to work here, you are going to help make sure no one else gets killed. He was spooking me out. I had to ask, wait, someone died from flushing a toilet? Not just one person. Over the years, 6 people have died because of that specific toilet. One of the victims, the last one, happened on my watch. The police filed his death as an unsolved crime, just like the others dating all the way back to, well, back a long time. My God, I said. Is there a reason why you haven't gotten rid of it? His eyes changed. The intensity was gone. He looked scared. I can't remove or alter the toilet in any way. It's in my contract, he said softly and leaned back into his chair. I didn't know what that meant, but I really wanted the job and didn't want to talk about this strange topic anymore. I can handle not flushing one toilet in the entire world. I assured him that I would never break my contract with him. He offered me the job. A year later, the toilet found a way to get my attention. Up till then, we had no problems. I had been down there 2-3 times a month to do small tasks or stack stuff. The basement seems much larger than all the other floors, and the bathroom is a small closet-sized room in the farthest corner from the stairs. The elevator doesn't even come down there, as if the building was originally constructed to conceal the underground cavern. I was unloading some extra air conditioning filters along the wall when I noticed a red mark on the floor. It was blood. One of my rat traps was missing. I had placed a few of them around the basement when I found rat turds earlier that month. The blood trail led me into the depths of that pit where the lighting is bad. And I knew where it was taking me before my eyes verified it. The blood trail led to the bathroom. There was a small hole between the closed door and the rotted frame. The dying rat had gone through the hole and was in the one place that I feared to go. But I couldn't leave a dead rat in there. It might have stunk up the basement. That's what I told myself, but I dare confess that curiosity may have got the best of me too. I opened the door and stepped half inside while I searched the wall for a light switch. The room was pitch black, making the rest of the basement seem lighter. I was starting to panic when I couldn't find the darn switch when I saw it. I went for it and took one big stride inside the small space and grabbed a hold of the metal chain that hung from the ceiling and yanked on it. Inexplicably, the light above my head still worked as the room lit up. I hadn't realized I was holding my breath until I let out a long sigh of relief. The front and side walls were wood. But the back wall was brick. Old brick with dried globs of mortar that looked like massive lesions. The toilet was also made of bricks. Perfectly carved stones that formed a wide base along the floor. There was no lid or back. The disfigured wall appears to have been built after the toilet structure as a back support. The hole in the center of the stone toilet is carved in the shape of a hexagon. The rat's blood trail leads across the floor and ends at the toilet. No trap. No rat. Just blood. I looked around. There wasn't anywhere for it to hide. There's no sink or trash can in there. No toilet paper either. There is only the toilet. I moved closer to see if there was any trace of the rat and trap having gone down the drain. Nothing. I leered into the belly of the toilet. Understand this, at this point, I was not fully in control of myself. It was as if I was slowly fading into a dream and witnessing my actions, not controlling them. I watched my hand reach for the stone lever along the left side of the toilet. It was as wide as a wallet and smooth like marble under my fingers. It's a death sentence, I thought, fighting my way to regain control. The landlord said it was a death sentence. It took all of my might to resist pressing down on the lever. A weaker person would have flushed. I ran out of there and went home early. After I calmed down, I rationalized what happened. I hadn't been sleeping great the last few nights. That's what I convinced myself. No need to freak out and no need to tell the landlord. I just needed rest. That night, I didn't get any. All night long I laid in bed with a disturbing ache in my gut. It was the toilet. I could feel it. Beckoning me. It was 2 weeks before I had the courage to go back down there. The rat's blood was dried up and the light was still on. I pulled the chain, closed the door and went back to ignoring the toilet. That was my mistake. I didn't realize how hungry it was. My close encounter with it must have increased its longing for a fresh victim. That means I bear some responsibility for what happened to the newlywed couple that recently moved into the building. I liked them very much. Young, energetic, and crazy for each other. Even though I only spoke with them a few times while they were in the process of moving in, but I could tell that they loved each other. Not as a new couple. As a pair of old souls that had found each other again. Maybe I'm being dramatic given what happened that day. The wife had knocked on my door to say that their toilet stopped flushing and for the life of them, they couldn't get it working again. She seemed embarrassed. I told her I'd be up in a few minutes to take a look at it. She left. I gathered my tool belt and called the landlord. He had told me many times to contact him immediately if there was a toilet-related issue anywhere on the premises. This was my first one. So I called him and told him the situation. "Stay where you are," he yells into the phone. "I'll be there in 5 minutes." I waited for him by the entrance. When he arrived, we went straight to the newlyweds' apartment and knocked on the door. The wife opened the door with a pleasant expression on her lovely face. But when she saw that the landlord was with me, she suddenly looked guilty of doing something bad. "Oh my gosh," she blurted out. "You gotta be kidding me? He got in trouble for that?" The landlord looked at me and I shrugged my shoulders. He turned back to her and said, "I'm here to inspect your bathroom with my maintenance man. I'm not aware of anyone being in trouble. I assume you're talking about your husband?" She giggled but didn't give an answer. She only looked more guilty of something. "Get him, please," he said. "He's not here," she replied, followed by an uncomfortable giggle. "What do you mean? Where is he?" "Well, our toilet broke over an hour ago and he really had to go, so..." The landlord suddenly grabbed the woman by her shoulders, startling her. "No! Where is he?" "We're sorry," she said. "You made such a big deal about us not being allowed to flush the toilet in the basement when we signed our lease that we thought it had to be a joke. And like I said, he really had to go." The landlord took off running. I instinctively ran behind him as the terrifying thought once again filled my head: flushing the toilet is a death sentence. I was out of breath by the time I entered the basement. The landlord was standing in front of the open bathroom door with his hands up in a calming stance. The light was on and beneath it stood the husband. He had his hand on the stone flushing lever. He looked at us and smiled. "Don't do it," pleaded the landlord. "I have to know," replied the husband, and then he flushed the toilet. That's when the wife entered the basement and stood right behind me. The two of them were so in love. You could tell by the way they held each other's gaze as a loud flushing sound emitted from that bottomless pit, despite the fact that no water circled the bowl. No, the toilet was dry, but still flushing. The four of us stood there without moving. And then I saw it in the husband's face. An expression came over him that I can only describe as pure horror. He was still looking at his wife behind me when the landlord turned to face my direction also and gasped at what he saw. I heard strange sounds at my back. Wheezing, gurgling, and splashing. I turned around, face to face with the wife. The toilet was draining all of the water from her. She was soaking wet as her pores pushed water out from every cell in her body with such force and speed that a large puddle was forming beneath her feet. Inside, her organs were suffocating and imploding. Her eyes gushed water out as she choked to death in seconds. The sound of the toilet draining slowly came to a silence as the wife collapsed on the wet floor, making a splash. She looked like a dried raisin. Someone started screaming. I think it was the husband. Maybe it was me. Maybe it came from my head. All I know for sure is that flushing that toilet is a death sentence. Not for whoever flushes it. Whoever that person loves the most. That's who dies. The ones we love the most. And it can't be stopped. I know because I was here as the cops came and declared her death an unsolved case. The landlord and I had to clean the newlyweds' apartment out for new tenants. The husband went mad and checked into a clinic. Their love story turned into a nightmare. And I worry for you out there. Who knows if there are more of them? They might even look different. Maybe they're starting to work together. I need you to believe me when I say that if you live in an apartment and you've been warned, then please, I beg you, don't flush the toilet. Story 3. My childhood friend asked if I remember the man in the chimney. It was late autumn, and a heavy downpour raged outside. I was sitting on the couch, watching an old film that was meant to help me escape the chaos of daily life. The rain drumming on the windows created a monotonous, soothing backdrop. The warmth of the apartment and the soft hum of the film slowly lulled me into a state of blissful relaxation. Suddenly, however, my moment of peace was interrupted by the sound of my phone ringing. I glanced at the screen and saw a name I hadn't seen in years, Henry. "Hello?" I answered hesitantly, wondering what could have prompted him to call now. "Hi, Tom. It's me, Henry. We haven't seen each other in a long time. Do you have a moment to meet up?" His voice carried an unsettling tone, something that made my heart race. "Of course, Henry. Is something wrong?" I asked, trying to hide my surprise. "This isn't a conversation for the phone," he said, his voice filled with concern. Something in Henry's voice told me this wasn't just about catching up on old times. We arranged to meet at a small cafe that we both remembered from our youth. It was a place we frequently visited before our paths diverged. I waited there, watching the raindrops fall, until I finally saw him entering. Henry looked different from how I remembered him, pale, with deeply set eyes, and something unsettling in his movements. We sat across from each other, and I ordered coffee, trying to control my thoughts. "What's going on, Henry? You look like you've seen a ghost," I said with a slight smile that quickly faded when I saw his expression. "Tom, I need to tell you something. Something that's been tormenting me all this time," he began, his voice trembling. "Do you remember the man in the chimney?" I knew this would be a difficult conversation. I felt a cold shiver running down my spine, and my heart began to beat faster. Everyone has events in their life that remain etched in memory forever, like stone carvings. For me, such a memory was the summer camp I attended with my best friend Henry when we were 11. It was a time of carefree laughter and fun, but those days also had something dark, something related to an old wooden cabin in the middle of the forest. The cabin had a high, gloomy chimney that still haunts my dreams. It was many years ago. Henry and I were excited about the prospect of 2 weeks of adventures, away from everyday life. The camp was deep in the woods, in a place where civilization seemed to have forgotten about its existence. The cabin we were to stay in was old, surrounded by a mysterious aura. At the end of the cabin was a chimney that seemed out of place at first glance, like a relic from the past. Inside, the cabin seemed cozy, with 2 beds on either side, but something caught my attention: doors in the middle of the room. I approached and opened them with a creak. For a moment, the doors revealed a fireplace that looked as if it hadn't been used in years. Confused, I closed the doors and resolved not to open them for the rest of the camp. The days passed with us exploring the area, swimming in the lake, and sitting by the campfire in the evening. The cabin was charming by day, but at night, when darkness fell, it turned into something entirely different. Shadows danced on the walls, and the wind whistled through the gaps, creating strange, unsettling sounds. During those times, Henry and I would lie quietly in our beds, listening to the sounds of the night and trying to fall asleep. One night, I suddenly woke up, feeling that something was wrong. At first, I thought it was just a nightmare that had disturbed me. I lay in bed, listening. Everything seemed normal until I suddenly heard a faint tapping. I got up and looked around, trying to locate the source of the sound. The noise was coming from behind the doors, from the chimney. I froze, my heart pounding. Slowly, I opened the doors and looked at the fireplace, and I saw something that made my hair stand on end. In the moonlight coming through the window, I saw a thin, pale hand emerging from the darkness. I held my breath, unable to believe my eyes. The hand moved slowly, as if searching for something in the darkness, then suddenly retreated, disappearing into the depths of the chimney. "Henry, wake up," I whispered, gently shaking my friend. Henry opened his eyes, looking at me in confusion. "What's wrong?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. "I saw something in the chimney," I replied, pointing to the spot where I had just seen the hand. Henry looked at me skeptically but got up and approached the fireplace. "There's nothing here, Tom," he said after a moment, peering inside. "Maybe you just had a bad dream." But I knew what I had seen. That night, I couldn't sleep, listening and staring at the chimney. The following days were spent as usual, playing, hiking, and telling stories by the campfire. But at night, I was always on edge, fearing that what I had seen would return. On the last night of camp, when everyone was asleep, I heard something even more terrifying. It was a whisper, soft and barely audible, as if someone was speaking to me from the depths of the chimney. I moved closer, and the voice became clearer. I pressed my ear to the door, and then I heard it. "Don't peek." I froze with fear. My mind screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Henry eventually woke from his restless sleep, interrupted by my unsettling sounds. He got out of bed, his movements full of irritation. His sleepy eyes looked at me with frustration, and his posture was tense. "Tom, what are you doing in the middle of the night?" he asked, his voice showing annoyance. I couldn't respond, just staring at those cursed doors. At that moment, the whispers ceased, replaced by scraping sounds coming from inside the chimney. "Look, Tom, it's just your imagination. You'll see that there's nothing there," Henry said, approaching the chimney doors, holding a flashlight that barely illuminated the darkness inside. He opened the door to the room with the fireplace, and an immediate cold draft filled the room. Henry entered the room and shone the flashlight into the chimney. Henry stood still for a few seconds, his eyes wide open, and his face was as pale as paper. His breathing became rapid and shallow, and his body trembled with fear. I saw his hands starting to shake, and the flashlight barely held in his grasp. It seemed his mind couldn't process what he saw. Suddenly, Henry ran out of the room. But before the doors of the room with the fireplace could be slammed shut, I felt something cold and sinister brush past. Before Henry closed the door, I saw a hand emerging from the darkness of the chimney. The hand was shockingly pale and emaciated, with long, terrifying claws that seemed to cut through the darkness. Henry spent the rest of the night huddled in a corner of the cabin. I never told anyone about what happened that night. As far as I know, Henry did the same, although we hadn't agreed to keep it a secret. I never learned exactly what happened that night, but I knew who knew the truth: Henry, who had called me this evening. After we finished school, our paths diverged, and I hadn't seen my friend for many long years. Until tonight. Do you remember that dreadful evening? That's when our lives changed forever, especially mine, when that evening I shone the flashlight into the chimney and saw. What did you see? I asked, concerned. I saw a humanoid, emaciated figure with black eye sockets. It was rushing towards me. There was really something there, you understand? I know your nightmare probably ended that night, but mine just began. Ever since, I hear whispers and scraping sounds coming from the chimney at night, but for some reason, only I hear them. I was probably the only person who didn't think he was crazy. I was there with him. I saw that dreadful hand. I'm going to that old cabin in the woods tomorrow. I can't stand it anymore. I need to end it. It occurred to me that I was probably seeing Henry for the last time. He got up from the table without a word and left the cafe. However, a few days later, I started hearing scratching sounds in the chimney.